Australians only have reimbursed access to 27% of medicines that are available worldwide.
That's a scandal. Joining me today is Josie Downey, Managing Director of Merck Healthcare Australia and New Zealand. Josie now leads one of the region's most clinically active biopharma operations and is an advocate for pharmaceutical access reform in Australia.
What excites me is precision medicine. We're matching the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Then that patient has a much higher chance of living longer.
And what industry challenge keeps you up at night?
Access. I think about all those poor patients that don't have access to the therapies they need.
Hello, I'm Romain Bonjean, CEO of RoseRx, and this is Future Pharma. On this podcast series, I explore the fast-moving evolution of life sciences, technology, and the evolving patient and HCP experience. I'll be talking to industry leaders who are looking forward to and understand the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. This series is brought to you by RoseRx. The future of healthcare lies in truly personalized patient and HCP journeys, and conversations like those on this podcast will help us all get there faster. Joining me today is Josie Downey, Managing Director of Merck Healthcare Australia and New Zealand. Josie began a career in the research lab before moving into pharmaceutical commercialization. With 25 years of applied experience, including establishing the oncology business unit at MSD, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and leading the commercial launch of Keytruda, a groundbreaking immunotherapy drug. Josie now leads one of the region's most clinically active biopharma operations. Since taking on the leadership role at Merck in 2021, she's tripled their oncology trial program through key partnerships. She also serves on Brain Cancer Australia's board and is an advocate for pharmaceutical access reform in Australia. Josie, thank you for joining us on Future Pharma today.
Thanks, Roman. It's a pleasure to be here.
What excites you with the future of healthcare and pharma in particular?
I think what excites me is precision medicine. I think that we're getting better and better at identifying treatments that really target specific small populations of patients. So moving towards the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. What worries me about precision medicine is that, we need to be helping patients one patient at a time, but we don't have a health technology assessment process that really caters to the needs of rare diseases, rare cancers. And so that does keep me up.
Keep you up at night.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, could you tell us the difference between precision medicine and personalized medicine?
Yeah, if I think about precision medicine as it applies to oncology, we're looking for specific mutations and matching the treatment to that mutation. Yeah. And by matching the treatment to that specific mutation, you give the patient a much better chance of survival.
Which is awesome.
Rather than a sledgehammer. So if you think about chemotherapy in the early days when we were developing chemotherapies, it was really a sledgehammer approach where everybody got chemotherapy. Some patients responded and some patients didn't. And we didn't really know why some patients responded and others didn't. Over time, with the research that we're doing and we're understanding more of how patients respond to therapies, we're identifying mutations, specific targets. We're able to develop new treatments that are much more targeted
and much more effective.
They're much more effective,
which is brilliant. And that's when we're talking about the fight against cancer. This is literally the path we're going to need to get. Fascinating. So going back to your role as managing director of Merck in Australia. Merck is a mid-sized pharma, as we say in the industry. How do you bring out this precision medicine against companies that are 10 times your size or so, and how do you implement it?
Merck is a specialty innovator company. So as you say, we're not a big company, we're a mid-sized company. And so we're very focused in our R&D. So we're focused in a couple of specific areas. Our biggest area is fertility. So Merck is a leading fertility company. And so we have been instrumental in delivering 6 million babies worldwide.
That's an awesome number.
Yeah, it's something that we're very, very proud of. And so we continue to innovate in fertility as well, and invest in data generation to really understand how can we help couples, help individuals take babies home. And so every time I hear about another baby being born, it warms my heart.
That's exciting.
And we also have an interesting portfolio in oncology. So we have a number of drugs to treat different cancers. And then we have an oral therapy for multiple sclerosis, which has helped over 100,000 people globally.
That's exciting. Actually, MS is a very interesting one. I come from outside the industry, and I recall MS being a very difficult disease as early as the 90s, and it seems to be nowadays very much looked at as a manageable chronic illness. And I think a lot has to do with life science progress in setting up the right armatorium.
Yeah, so MS has had huge progress, and it's so good for patients because MS hits patients that are quite young. So it takes, kids, people that have young children that are in the middle of their working career, and it's obviously quite debilitating and can cause death. And so there've been huge advances in multiple sclerosis. And the other thing about the treatments for MS is that if you think about the broader economic impact of being able to keep somebody in the workforce, not having to rely on carers. You think about the burden on families as well, and the way they suffer having to care for a loved one with multiple sclerosis. It's quite extraordinary. And there was a study done a few years ago looking at the NDIS costs for multiple sclerosis. And so someone with severe multiple sclerosis, and this was a few years ago, the cost of supporting someone just through the NDIS, not healthcare costs, not productivity costs, not lost work days, but just the NDIS costs was $135,000 a year.
I see. Yeah, and so if you add on top of that productivity loss, you're looking at very heavy disease burden for the community, which is fascinating because that hints about questions on access and health economics, which is the part of pharma very few people like to talk about, but it's a fundamental. How much does the community, the Commonwealth, gets to pay for a therapeutics to make sure that not even are people back to being productive selves, but also potentially cured from diseases. This is a really interesting topic, which is very hard to discuss outside of pharma. You find the health economics is always the one that spikes people. And but how much things cost.
And I think we need to think about it as an investment, because if you invest in the health of your population, if you have a healthy population, then you are more likely to have a healthy economy. When you don't have your health, you really don't have anything. And we know from studies, many publications, that investing in health has a positive productivity impact. So I think it's important that we consider it an investment rather than a cost. And if you think about spending in other areas of government, the spending on pharmaceuticals is quite small, and expense on innovative medicines is about 0.21% of GDP.
Which is not much.
Which is very low. It's one of the lowest in the OECD world of comparable countries. Like if you compare us with Europe,
it's actually it's a bit of a segue. I think we were looking forward to talking about access, and I don't know if it applies on oncotherapeutic. I believe it does, but I was talking to a family member, which happened to be a rheumatologist in France, and rheumatology typically has fairly expensive biologic access, which is a type of therapeutics that are disease modifying for our listener. And I was really striking to hear that in Europe, you can access cutting edge therapeutics, disease modifying therapeutic at the clinician discretion. So if they judge that an early intervention with a disease modifying therapeutic is done early, the outcome is much, much better because you shorten the chance of having any form of distal disformation, etc. And he was shocked to hear that in Australia, for health economic purposes, you couldn't access those therapeutics without first
doing 6 months minimum of old, difficult, cheap therapeutics. And essentially the fact that you were forced, in the off chance that they may work, on old, ineffective therapeutics, which were quite toxic, before accessing the good stuff, to simplify the conversation, was seen from outside a shocking mechanism of health economic, because essentially you were saying, look, I get it, on a whiteboard perspective, you're trying to pick up the few patients which may react positively on cheaper compound, but you are doing that by penalizing the majority which would benefit on the newer compound, because you're trying to save money, but the equation is wrong, because ultimately you're increasing the disease burden by 6 months multiplied by the number of patients and effectively delaying positive outcome. On top of that, it's fairly cruel if you look at it.
Yeah.
Is it the same case in oncology in Australia?
Look, I actually want to just come back to the anti-TNFs, because I know from personal experience. I have a nephew who was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when he was in his late teens. And he was put on a series of very, very old medications, including, drugs that are used for methotrexate, which is used for treatment of cancer, and highly, highly toxic. And I remember the poor kid waking up in the morning and not being able to move and just in pain. And then, they kept upping doses of therapy. He was hospitalised for it was well over a week because of adverse reactions to these earlier therapies. He's still not on a innovative therapy. So we've finally got to the stage where he's suffered enough. Remember, he's working, but he has many days where he's disabled. He's in extreme pain. You can imagine that the anxiety that it creates for his parents as well. So he's finally now getting to a stage where he has the hope of being written a therapy that will be a disease modifying agent, because he's deteriorated so much that he's now going to have to live with the consequences of that for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I did get diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and I did this exact experience in my late 20s, and I was lucky to get Professor Youssef as a specialist, which literally told me to throw methotrexate down the sink, and I was just taking steroid to calm the pain and minimize, but it was very painful. And then by the time I got onto, obviously, Humira as second line, it was a miracle. It stopped hurting. Then Humira wore off, so we moved to abatacept, and then I had some infusion, and at some stage it just completely went asymptomatic, and I've not had any medication, touch wood, to manage it for now 20 years.
That's fantastic. But that was 20 years ago.
It was 20 years ago, and I've never had a flare-up. I've got to make sure never to get tired, but I've never had a flare-up. But I still carry distal disformation from the 8 months pre-disease-modifying therapeutics as like a little signature of this very cruel access system in Australia. So it's a personal thing for me to talk about access, because I think we actually have a lot of world-class approach to healthcare in many, many ways. We definitely have world-class science. I think that contrary to popular political whinging, we do have a world-class medical access system,
and our hospitals aren't too bad. I think
correct.
If you have an emergency, you generally have good access to care within hospitals. So acute. But, we want to keep people out of hospital as well.
So obviously we talked about immuno, and it's a blatant issue of access. But is this reflected in oncology as well? I
think oncology is one of the areas that's impacted even more, because there's been so much innovation in the treatment of cancers. I know that there are more than 10,000 patients in Australia that are paying for treatments privately. Out of pocket. So this, you can imagine, in a country where we pride ourselves on equitable access to healthcare, we're moving towards a two-tiered system, and that's my biggest concern. Access to medicines and equitable access for everybody should be something that is fundamental to the way we have operated in Australia. And the PBS has been absolutely foundational in helping improve the health of Australians for many, many years. But it hasn't kept up with developments in growth of innovation in new treatments. And so I would say that the PBS is not fit for purpose, and it really does need reform.
So essentially the PBS is not fit for purpose in precision medicine. So the ability to cover a medication which is known to be highly effective for a specific type of cancer or disease, the PBS doesn't work that way. I'm alarmed at the statistic you just said. 10,000 Australians are paying out of pocket for cancer treatment. That's usually an economic iceberg. It would mean that there's X thousands of Australians that cannot afford the cancer treatment or the one that's appropriate for the disease. That's a scandal, and I don't think it's being told enough.
Yeah, that's right. It's not fair, right? There's a lot of patients that just can't afford to access treatments, and I think if we think about how new medicines are assessed for reimbursement, we're moving towards developing therapies that are much more targeted for smaller patient populations. So as we develop more precise therapies, we have smaller and smaller patient groups that respond. And often we don't have the clinical trial population that can support the way that drugs are assessed in terms of the value.
That was actually my next question, and this one really stems out of curiosity. We know the members that staff PBAC, the Pharmaco Benefit Council. They're very competent people that are usually extremely well versed in the field, and Australia has highly qualified individuals. What restricts them in accepting those therapeutics or covering those therapeutics? Is there instruction at the minister level or at the DHS level that says this is the amount of money you got, let's not go over it? Or is there really some process systems in place, and sorry to get to the nitty-gritty, that stops those highly competent healthcare professionals to approve those therapeutics?
The way that medicines are assessed, if I think about some of the things that need to be reviewed, so in order to assess a medicine, the value of a medicine, you have to compare it against something else. There's a requirement generally that the medicine is compared against the lowest cost comparator, even if that medicine is not very often used for very, very valid reasons. If it's not very often prescribed, it's the cheapest, right? So it could be that medicine is only used in 1% of patients or 5% of patients. The new medicine has to be compared with regards to value against that medicine. So if it's a genericized medicine, if it's almost impossible.
So methotrexate is always going to be a benchmark against disease-modifying biology. That is insane.
Yes.
And so essentially you're asking those highly qualified healthcare professionals that sits on PBAC to fit those square shapes into those round holes at all costs. It must be a very frustrating board to sit on.
Well, I guess it's a decision, right? And then there are lots of other confounding factors. So the value of medicines is only assessed within the healthcare impact on healthcare costs. So it doesn't take into account how how many days patients are missing from work, carers, how many, whether they have family members having to look after them, the number of the inconvenience if they've got to have an infusion rather than a tablet. Those things are...
Why is this not taken into account? It's not like the government doesn't know how to measure economic impact. I mean, we know crime is measured that way. We know innovation investment, and most of the budget is designed by taking quite creatively into account productivity gain in the future. Why healthcare specifically has those restrictions? It seems to be quite cruel.
Yeah, look, I in the past, I guess it was less restricted. Over time, the system has become much, much more rigid. And I agree with you, productivity gains are crucial for us in Australia. We know that Australia is not performing as well as we should in terms of productivity and innovation and things that get in the way of Australia, the Australian economy growing should be assessed. And this is why, you know, we do need significant reform of health technology assessment. And I think it's going to be a long process, right? Because changing the way systems operate, and when they're large and they cost money, it takes a long time.
I think it is a very important subject because accessing precision medicine is in everyone's best interest. The statistics are that most of it will come at some stage across diseases, and being able to solve them with the right medication. Why isn't that communicated enough? I mean, surely, especially with the advance of gene therapy around the corner and then even more complex precision medicine, these costs are only going to go up. You know, patient diagnostic, pathology, design, reinfusion. These are very expensive therapeutics that are around the corner, which are tremendous effect on, you know, saving people's life. We're not ready.
Look, I think the first thing we need to do is that we need to take into account what we call second-order effects, so impacts outside of just healthcare costs. What is the true impact of new innovations for Australian patients? The other area that's a little bit more complex that needs to be addressed is the separation of the state health budgets and the federal health budget. Who pays for these treatments? Because if you think about cell and gene therapy, you have them being managed in hospitals, which are funded by state budgets, and so there needs to be more work done between state and federal governments to determine how can we provide access to patients to these really important and often, you know, life-altering, often life-saving therapies.
They definitely are. You said earlier that we sit incredibly low as a share of national spend in innovative medicine. Could you talk a little bit more about that and where you think we should be?
So, Australia is one of the lowest of the OECD countries. If you look at access overall to innovative medicines, Australians only have reimbursed access to 27% of medicines that are available worldwide.
That's
of the
insane.
new innovative medicines.
Of new innovative medicine, you only have access to under reimbursement to 27%.
Yep, that's right.
That's definitely the sign of a broken system. So where would you think we should be, and where the spend proportion should be for Australian to really have access to those innovative medicine?
So given that the spend is quite small, even doubling that would certainly improve access to many, many more patients and help them lead better, more effective lives. So government needs to increase investment in innovative medicines.
That's terrifying. And you don't think that when you live healthy lives, but when you're at the front line, these are really bad numbers.
Yeah, so you don't know that. I think with most Australians, you don't know that you're missing out on something until you need it. I think generally Australians do think that they have good access to healthcare and good access to medicines, but it's until you or a loved one needs a particular treatment that you realise that our access is limited.
And certainly it bears campaigning a lot more than just saying save Medicare here. We need to really rethink PBS. So Josie, you mentioned your mid-sized pharma. Merck Australia has some spectacular results in the rate and speed of clinical trials you've done. I think you've more than tripled in the last 2 years. What was the magic in terms of personnel or software data that you've done at Merck to accelerate clinical trials so much?
Yeah, I think when you're a smaller organisation, you're a lot more agile. Everybody knows everybody and everybody works to help others be successful. So we have an amazing clinical trials lead who engage really well across the different centres. So she was able to, with the support of our medical team, to triple our clinical trials program, to double the number of sites across Australia. And as I said, we have a small but targeted development program, and almost every program is now available in Australia.
That's terrific.
I do. So I'm really proud of what the team's achieved, and but I'm going to bring it back to access as well, because one of the things that keeps me awake at night as well is the ethics of running a clinical trial when you're not guaranteed that you can provide access after the trial. So, and this is a problem for many companies, right? So we initiate trials, we are able to then demonstrate efficacy, develop a regulatory dossier, gain regulatory approval so that the drug can be available in the country. But then the rate limiting step is access. Yeah. So we've got to be careful that we're not moving into a system like New Zealand where we run clinical trials and then can't provide access
to therapeutic. And
afterwards.
So I think it pays to summarize that for our listener. Essentially, we have had a lot of change in Australia to really accelerate clinical trials, so the ability to access and trial new therapeutics. But we had very little change or reform in making sure that as those trials show success, those same patient can afford and access those therapeutics. So essentially the assumption is, hey, he can try it and here's a great outcome. But by the way, when it comes down to paying for those treatment that are shown efficiency, you're on your own. And this is a big issue. So we've certainly had great reform in terms of trial access, especially in difficult onco cases, and I think Australia has adopted some American standard for patient access of therapeutics, which have been quite successful. Yet the coverage has just not followed at all. So you've got this ethical dilemma where patients show great efficacy on the therapeutics, but unless it's given to them for free, no one is there to pay for it, and this creates a real
that's right.
issue.
So are companies making decisions to fund trials in countries where they know that that the government values their innovation and will reimburse that innovation?
Yeah. So you implying that you may see clinical trial access dry up because the financial burden of keeping patients on treatment sit outside of Commonwealth's obligation, and so you're running the risk of Australia being shut out of innovative therapeutics if there's no reform to access.
That's right, and look, and I think New Zealand's a good case study where New Zealand used to have equitable access. It was very similar to other countries, and changes to reimbursement of new therapies in New Zealand has led to a huge gap in access between New Zealand and even Australia. The access environment for patients in New Zealand is even worse than Australia.
This is a fascinating pain point, and I don't think it's being discussed enough. There's a lot of prevention conversation, but there's not much access conversation. There should be more of it. Josie, so Merck has tripled the amount of oncology trial, which is quite phenomenal. You had a partnership that's very interesting with Omico. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how it helped accelerate those trials?
Yeah, so Omico is an amazing organisation, and it really is as a result of the partnership with Omico that we were able to increase our trial footprint. So Omico has developed a platform called Prospect, where their vision is that every patient with an advanced cancer or an incurable cancer has access to complete genomic profiling. And so that allows them then to match the patient's tumour DNA to the right advanced therapy. And they recently released a report that shows that patients through their program showed a 50% increase in overall survival.
That's insane.
Yeah,
That sounds brilliant.
It's amazing. And with research, we're understanding more and more how to develop therapies that will treat a specific cancer type. So genomic profiling allows us to understand the DNA signature of the tumour, of the cancer, and then it makes it easier to match a therapy that will help the patient for that specific signature. So if you think about it from a clinical trial perspective, when more and more companies are developing more targeted therapies, so you might be developing a therapy in a mutation in, say, a mutation of a lung cancer that may only affect, say, 3 or 4% of lung cancer patients. How are you going to find those patients? It's almost like finding a needle in a haystack. And so if you've got to go and start screening from day one, it can take quite a few years to identify enough patients to demonstrate whether your therapy is effective through a clinical trial. So Omico have this huge database of patients. And so we can go to them and say, we're looking for patients with these specific characteristics and these specific mutations, and they can geolocate the patients. And so it gives us a huge head start in Australia, and it makes Australia much, much more competitive when it comes to clinical trials.
Terrific.
And patients don't have time to wait, because if you're a patient with an advanced cancer, you need to be treated straight away. And this is why I love the program, because we're matching the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Then that patient has a much higher chance of having a response and living longer.
That's awesome. That is it's a bright future.
Yes.
That gets me excited about healthcare, actually. I always remember when you ask a rheumatologist why they choose that, it's like, I wanted to do oncology, but I didn't like seeing my patient die.
Yeah.
And I think now you're going to get more and more young doctors going into oncology because the adverse outcomes are less frequent. So,
well, I remember when I launched Keytruda when I worked at MSD and got to know melanoma doctors really, really well. And I remember there was this wonderful doctor called Rick Kefford. He said that nobody wanted to do melanoma because they called it the graveyard of oncology, because there was so little treatments available. And then with the advent of the immuno-oncology drugs, it just changed.
And it's funny, I spend most of my social network is not in pharma. And you spend your days defending pharma and saying, you don't realize the advancement. There's always this term big pharma, and it sounds to be this big, opaque business. And even with fairly well-educated people like lawyers, bankers, you often go and put your hand in your head and go, I can't believe what you just said. It's wrong. It's not true. It's not how science is done. And
I feel very privileged to be working in this industry. I love it. We have so much meaning and purpose in what we do.
I agree.
It makes it so easy to come to work every day.
Yeah, and since I couldn't get into medicine, it's the next best thing I do. Just kidding. I wasn't smart enough for it. Josie, today we talked a lot about genomic. Obviously, these are big data play. I want to go back to Merck specifically and AI, if that's okay. What tool sets and how much does artificial intelligence help Merck from the development perspective to the recruitment perspective, and if even in the commercialization perspective? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Merck is I think has been an early adopter of AI, and I know that we ranked number 2 in globally as in terms of biopharmaceutical companies that have adopted AI. Mm-hmm. In the R&D space, identifying candidates for development through AI. I mean, it is much, much faster. I was given an interesting statistic the other day. If you think about a PhD student, they generally take 4 years to develop a thesis. Mm-hmm. 10 months of that time is spent on data analysis, data curation, data cleaning. AI now does that in the space of a couple of days.
It's actually quite fascinating. So say we had
Merck headquarters and we decide on where to search next, is that a bunch of data mining that's happening that AI goes, oh, that looks like a potential molecule, that looks like a potential molecule, and it funnels up to a bench of medical science people go, oh, we'll take this one and start the clinical trials? Or is it more around a hyper focus, and because you've got access to patient data, etc., you through adjacencies, you direct those research? I was always intrigued on who makes those decisions and how they're made.
I know that Merck, for instance, and most companies will focus in the areas that they have strength in, because it's one thing to identify a potential candidate. It's another thing to develop a preclinical program and then a clinical program to develop that candidate. And we know that we assess hundreds of thousands of candidates before we're able to identify one that is going to have a positive impact on a patient. So developing the candidate, that's where the cost is, and that's where the huge investment is. That's where the billions of dollars of investment are. And so having expertise in the organisation, so for instance in oncology as an example, if we have an expertise in specific areas of oncology, then they're the disease areas that we're going to develop. So for us, colorectal cancer is a really good example where we have really high expertise in the organisation. So it's of interest to us and a focus for us that we continue to find new therapies for colorectal cancer that can improve further patient outcomes.
So your research algorithm are to focus specifically around this space.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's terrific. Now, going back on the AI tooling, what tools, if you can disclose that, are you specifically using across the organizations? Since you're such a high-ranked pharma for users of cutting-edge technology, quite interested in what other tools you're using it and whether it's across the entire organization or mostly on the R&D component.
Across Merck, I would say generally that we're quite high users of AI. If I'm talking specifically about Australia, so we use a platform called Optimize, which is a platform that was developed by Palantir. We're upskilling our organisation, so we're all learning, but we're very much invested in helping people know how to use it effectively and responsibly. So we've got lots of learning platforms, lots of training opportunities, whether it's a face-to-face one-on-one or you can enroll in a course, do something online.
That's
lots
awesome.
of opportunities to learn.
Terrific. And are you using it at all in commercialization?
Yeah, we are. Interestingly, one of the guys in my commercial excellence team was presenting on what our team did this year. And he put this number up, and it was 700 billion. And he asked everybody, what does that number signify? And everybody looked, and somebody said, "Oh, our sales target."
That's a bit high.
But it's the number of rows of data that we have analysed in our local organisation this year. 700 billion. So, we're learning to use AI. We're now moving towards automated forecasting. We're using it to help develop insights on patient journeys, on treatment outcomes, on customer preferences. And this is where AI can help us a lot. So understanding customer preferences also helps with decision making. It helps fuel or support our omni-channel approach.
Yeah, this is quite fascinating when you're talking about the customer. In your organization, who is the customer? Is it the healthcare professional, or is it the patient, or is it both?
Yeah, so look, in healthcare, I think we still say that our major customer is the healthcare professional. We do have limited engagement with patients. We do provide patient support programs. So I'm really proud of some of the patient support tools that we have developed. So once the patient has been prescribed a specific therapy, we can offer engagement in a way that helps them manage the disease they have or manage the therapy that they're on.
Look, this is a fascinating subject for us. This dyslexia between who's the consumer, who's the customer. Is it the healthcare professional, which essentially authorized the therapeutic by prescribing it, or is it the patient? And we're talking about industries that have, used the word patient centricity for a long time, and all of you, the industry, have built really good patient support program. I always had an issue with the idea that a customer is the prescriber, because fundamentally it is the patient that benefits from it. And I always had an issue because it somehow accepts that access and coverage is reliant only on the healthcare professional. Similarly, I've got issue when people refuse to talk to the healthcare professional, like if they're not customer in the first place. I think everyone's a consumer. Everyone has consumer-like habits, and you need to talk to them like this. But I always found this is a personal issue. I always found it nearly a bit patronizing, not directly, but to not consider the patient as being. And so what happened in an area of hyper-digitization that we've seen post-COVID is your patient is being lost and hijacked by a huge amount of unclinical bullshit because no one's accompanying the patient online, especially at very distressful times. And this is a mountain I will die on, a hill I will die on, is your patient is online, inquiring about the disease or the loved one disease, inquiring about the cancer, and the media and information they consume is delaying their access. So the HCP is not doing enough to go and capture that patient. So I think that there's an obligation of pharma to talk to patient pre-prescription as much as possible. There's an obligation for pharma to realize that they're going to need to be service company and servicing the true client. Otherwise, they're going to get commoditized and someone else will own that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting times, isn't it? Because we have access to so much data. Everybody has access to so much data. And I think the dangerous thing is that you can find evidence to support any opinion you want. And so that doesn't help either, right? And we need to be responsible about how we communicate, how we manage data. I will say that within the health technology assessment process, when one of the big calls through HTA reform is that consumers and patients have a much bigger voice in deciding which therapies are reimbursed, or at least being able to communicate their journey and what they're suffering, and so that it makes it realer, because it's easy to I think what happens when you're assessing. Well, I'm not a health economist, but when health economists are assessing drugs for reimbursement, they look at things at a population level, and it's about numbers and about cost, but they're not really thinking about the real impact on individuals. And I think the voice of the patient is absolutely crucial.
Linking back to access, we've seen tremendous tools appearing in the United States to help healthcare professionals navigate patient using AI, which are sponsored by a life science company. And very often the key attraction to the tool is navigating coverage. So coverage is this American term for does my insurance replace it? And in many ways, I think we're talking about the same thing when we're talking about access. So do you see usefulness in tools that helps oncologists and other specialists navigate patient into the absolute maze that is coverage, to use the American term, but actually access? So does this therapeutic or this specific presentation is covered by the PBS, is covered by, if somewhere private health insurance could participate? Do you see usefulness in those tools?
I see usefulness in those tools when clinicians are looking at what would be the best treatment algorithm for a patient, because especially when we're looking at rarer cancers, there are tools that are available. So if I think about, I know of Syntropy, which is a joint venture between Merck and Palantir, where they've developed a platform called Foundry, which can it's essentially manages the data, and I'm really fascinated by how it works because it can take data from different platforms, and it can curate the data, it can clean the data, it can systematize the data. Every data point has a specific provenance and lineage. So the data owner, the owner of that data point, can determine whether they give access to another party or not. Mm-hmm. And then you can obviously interrogate the database to ask questions. So you're pulling together all these disparate platforms, and then being able to sort the data and pull out meaningful insights that can help the patient. I think that's really important. For us, I guess I see reimbursement as reasonably black and white, but it's probably not. You're right. Being able to interrogate, for instance, our pharmaceutical benefits scheme to understand what treatments are available for a patient would be really helpful. Mm. Yeah.
It sounds like Merck takes AI very seriously.
Oh, absolutely. So Merck, we actually have a code of ethics that is published online. We have a global director of digital bioethics as well, who has been to Australia and engaged with academics, with private industry, to really understand the ecosystem in Australia, how it can be supported, and to have those discussions around what's appropriate and what's not. So we, as an organisation, continue to challenge the way we operate to ensure that we are leveraging AI responsibly.
That's awesome, and it's very du jour. I mean, the government's talking a lot about traceability of data and use case and the ethics of it all. So this is fascinating. So you truly are leading on the AI front. That's fantastic. Josie, apologies, but I usually ask very simple questions right at the end in a fire way. What's your biggest industry prediction for 2026 specifically?
My biggest industry prediction, I think we're going to see many more rare cancers, rare diseases, therapies entering the market.
Terrific. And what industry challenge keeps you up at night?
Access. I think about all those poor patients that don't have access to the therapies they need.
What's one misconception about mid-sized pharma?
One misconception about mid-sized pharma is that they may not be as sophisticated as some of the bigger pharma. And what I've learned, having worked for both small and large pharma, is that there's a hell of a lot of innovation in a smaller pharma.
Terrific. And as a startup, I'll agree 100%. Josie, thank you for joining us on Future Pharma, and we will add your details at the bottom of this presentation for people that want to contact you. If people want to know more, what would be the next step?
Just contact me on LinkedIn.
Pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here, Roman.